Hello, everybody. This is Claudia Sherbanutza, and I'm very happy. We are wrapping up the third day of the Occupy Library Conference, and we're doing it in a style that has to do with the values of Occupy Library. We are bringing in democratic participation. We are bringing in active citizens involved in sharing knowledge in a democratic way. And we do this in a partnership that is very valuable to us with Wikimedia folks, let's say. Progress Foundation is based in Romania, and for a number of years, we've been working in projects with the National Association of Public Libraries and the Wikimedians of Romania and Moldova in what's called OneLibOneRef events. For us, they started a number of years ago, and they have been successful. And in conversation with the contributors to Wikimedians from Romania, we said, you know, if you're doing an Occupy Library conference, we need to have somebody from close to Wikipedia. And so we were lucky to get to know Asaf Bartov. And I'm inviting Asaf on the stage to as our keynote speaker here at the Occupy Library. Asaf is a senior program officer at the Wikimedia Foundation. And the Wikimedia Foundation is the NGO behind Wikipedia. I'm sure many of you already know this. And of course, like any regular passionate person of Wikipedia, Asaf is an editor with Wikipedia for a long time. And he's been coordinating the efforts of volunteers, investing in the capacity development of the volunteers within the Wikimedia Foundation. And the volunteers that he's working with, and this is interesting, that's how we got to be connected, are from India, sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil, and also Eastern Europe. So Eastern European Wikimedians, if you're around, please let us know in the chat. If you're a librarian and you edited at least one article on Wikipedia, please let us know in the chat. In the meantime, Asaf, we are welcome to Occupy Library. Thank you for being here with us. And I invite you to tell us why librarians and Wikimedia are natural partners.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me to lovely Bucharest. Unfortunately, it ended up being online, but there are benefits, as the poll on the right reminds us. We could technically be in our pajamas right now, but I'll keep my answer to the poll confidential. So thank you for introducing me. I'm from Israel. I've been volunteering with Wikipedia since 2001, the year it was created. And I've been working for the Wikimedia Foundation as my paid day job since 2011. This is a good moment to remind you that nobody, literally not a single person at the Wikimedia Foundation is paid to edit Wikipedia or to directly contribute content. We do other things. We develop the software, we run the server farm, we do legal support, other things. But I am also, like I said, a volunteer editor in my spare time. At the foundation, I focused on grant making and capacity building, especially in the rest of the world, not North America, not Western Europe, almost everywhere else. Another volunteer activity of mine that is relevant to this audience is I founded a project called Project Ben-Yehuda, which is a Hebrew digital library, entirely volunteer run and free to access, free of charge, free of advertising. It's sort of an equivalent to Project Gutenberg, if that's a familiar name to you. And we have already digitized 23,000 Hebrew works, most of them public domain, and some we are making available by permission before the copyright expires. And the last bit of relevant background of mine is that I was also active in various stages in integrating the library world and library geeks with the link data world and link data geeks. This combination is more familiar and obvious today than it was in 2010 when I started working on it, but I'm very excited about both of those fields. I should mention that I am not technically, formally a librarian. I have not gone to library school. I am a librarian by virtue of having founded a library, I guess. But just to be clear, I don't belong to the professional class. So I mentioned the Wikimedia Foundation, not Wikipedia. So Wikipedia you already know, the free encyclopedia we all use. Normally when I have an audience in front of me, I ask, show of hands, how many of you have used Wikipedia last month? But my psychic powers tell me that all of you have used Wikipedia last month because it's just so darn useful. So you know Wikipedia. I'll remind you of a couple of numbers. We have what I call useful editions, like actual serious reference works in about 100 languages. And there's about 200 more Wikipedia languages that are in earlier stages and aren't quite as useful as you would expect a general encyclopedia to be yet. But altogether, they have more than 20 million articles. Over 6 million of those are on the English Wikipedia, which is the largest Wikipedia. I don't want to spend a lot of time on Wikipedia because you already know it, but I do want to share the Wikimedia vision, the vision that guides us, because I think I can maybe offer you some new points of insight about it. So the vision is, imagine a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. That's our commitment. And I have bolded a few words here. But first I want to point out what isn't here. The word wiki is not included in the vision statement. The word computer is not included in the vision statement. The word encyclopedia is not included in the vision statement. And that's a very deliberate choice, because the encyclopedia on a wiki, which is what we are known for, is just an instrument. It's just a device, a vehicle towards this vision. The vision is a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge, whether that's through an encyclopedia or through some other vehicle that we haven't invented yet, doesn't matter. That's the world we are working towards. We are very deliberately not limiting ourselves to the traditional vehicle of an encyclopedia or to the current vehicle of a wiki on the internet, etc. Now, moving on to what is in the vision, when we say every single human, that is a radical statement. Every single human, not just humans with internet access. Every single human, not just literate humans. When you think about it profoundly, you realize what a radical commitment it is to try to get every single human to be able to freely share in the sum of all knowledge. And freely sharing is not just not having to pay for it, not just free of charge. It is also to be able to share in the creation and curation of knowledge, not just to consume it. If you are only the consumer, if you are only having knowledge brought to you for you to read or consume, but you cannot do anything with it, you cannot modify it or contribute to it or enrich it in any way or correct it in any way, then you are not freely sharing in all this knowledge. And then, of course, there is the question, what is all knowledge? Percent-wise, how far along are we? And that's, of course, a very difficult question. But there are some Wikipedians who are literally trying to put some numbers to it to gauge our progress. We are, of course, very far from achieving our vision, but we like it because we feel it's such a clear and obvious goal that it's a useful compass. Whenever we are in doubt, we can look at the vision and say, okay, that's where we're going. That's where we want to go. Does this proposal or would this strategy move us towards it? So I wanted to share our vision, and that is the Wikimedia vision. Now, to reach every single human and to be able to share in the sum of all knowledge, not just all encyclopedic knowledge, not just all written knowledge, we clearly need more than an encyclopedia. So there are sister projects, which may be less familiar to you. We collect thousands of public domain works in a project called Wikisource. Wikisource, which is essentially a digital library for primary sources, for texts as they are. Not a collaboratively built encyclopedia like Wikipedia, but just a collection of texts as they were originally published, but in digital form, of course. We collect media objects under free license, photos, videos, music, audio of all kinds in a project called the Wikimedia Commons. We already offer more than 64 million free media objects, completely free to use under the free license terms, which usually involves giving credit, giving attribution. But other than that, you are free to incorporate 64 million free media objects in everything you do, including commercial works. And our more recent project, Wikidata, where we collect structured data and metadata about, so far, 90 million things. And these things are everything. They are people and places and concepts and songs and rivers and books. 90 million things of all kinds that are described by billions of structured data triples. For those of you who know something about linked data, structured data, this is our triple store. And because it is structured data, it is machine queryable, which makes it a very powerful source for research and for answering questions that were impossible or very difficult to answer without it, would be impossible to answer without it. Together, these projects are Wikimedia with an M. It's the family of free knowledge, free culture, and free media projects. Itself, of course, all running on free software. The wiki software that we use, including the structured data part called Wikibase, are all free software that you can use in your institutions as well. Wikimedia is also the name for the movement of volunteers and affiliate organizations that support this cause, a whole ecosystem that works toward the vision that I shared. The Wikimedia Foundation is a US nonprofit that serves several core functions, primarily raising the money to do all this, raising donations to support a website that's among the top 10 most heavily trafficked websites on the planet, pays the bills for all that, employs a core engineering team, provides legal support, provides community support in people like me. But the foundation is only one big player in that ecosystem, and there are about 180 local affiliates, many of them geography-based around a country or a city or a region, but some of them subject-based, like Wikimedians who work on medicine, or Wikimedians who are interested in LGBT issues. So there are 180 such affiliates, such groups of Wikimedians who generally speak the local language and are ready to partner with you. My goal today is to convince you to partner with them if you aren't already. So who does all this ambitious free culture work? Volunteers, of course. I'm sure you already know this. We have about 80,000 regularly active volunteers around the world. That means people who regularly edit, contribute at least once a week around the world. And then there are many, many more casual contributors, people who contribute here and there and are not working every week on the wiki projects. So here's a quick photo of a few of those volunteers. This was taken at a conference in Berlin, but the crowd here is extremely diverse and international. I'm the guy with a lion on his head. Do you see me? Never mind. And who are they? Where do they come from? Where do they come from, these volunteers? They're folks like you and me. That means they come from all walks of life. They're students, they're professors, they're professionals, they're academics, teenagers, retirees, soldiers, and many, I mentioned retirees, and of course, quite a few librarians. Librarians are naturally attracted to knowledge curation, and that's as it should be. And so we have always had very good participation from the library sector. We have had librarians serve on our board of trustees of the Wikimedia Foundation, and we have always considered them allies. So that brings me to the central theme. Wikimedia and libraries are natural partners. I want to suggest to you that we pursue the same goals for the same reasons to serve the same public in different methods. I hope you agree with this assertion. What do I mean by different methods? Well, traditionally, I mean, we've heard in the conference quite a bit about all the non-traditional or less traditional things that libraries do these days. But traditionally, the core function of a library is to create and store knowledge in the original publications it was published in. And then it is up to the library patrons, possibly assisted by a librarian, to do any synthesis or check for up-to-dateness. Whereas Wikipedia, ideally at its best, offers up-to-date syntheses of multiple reliable sources and offers you a single narrative about the topic, about various aspects of the topic. But it gives you one narrative with a beginning, middle, and end that tells you about the topic. And of course, Wikipedia also refers its readers to further reading, much of it not online, i.e. in libraries. Wikipedians are sometimes suspected of thinking that, well, now that there's Wikipedia, we don't need any traditional libraries. Wikipedia is the be-all and end-all. Now that we have Wikipedia at the click of a mouse, who needs anything else? But Wikipedians, volunteers of Wikipedia, will be the first to tell you how much that is, of course, not true. Wikipedians are the first to say we absolutely depend on reliable sources. To give you a quick example, this is a screenshot of the English Wikipedia article about the Romanian historian and thinker Mircea Eliade. I hope I didn't butcher the name too much. And of course, it starts like every Wikipedia article with general information about the subject. But if we skip several screenfuls down, we see that the article ends with a selected bibliography, all of it not online, as you can see, but we refer you to it. And of course, after the footnotes, the references, the citations for all the information that we brought, we actually direct you to a whole list of secondary sources. Some of them are online. And further reading in English and in other languages, since, of course, a lot of the scholarship about Eliade is in other languages. So that was just an example, almost at random. I picked the example of a famous Romanian I knew about in honor of our hosts. But this is just to remind you that Wikipedia itself is a fan of libraries and directs people back to libraries for the resources that Wikipedia couldn't possibly provide on its own. So you already know Wikipedia. I want to share with you a quick demonstration of Wikidata. for those who haven't encountered it yet. And I'll start with a pop quiz. Who is the most famous Romanian? And for the purposes of our question, let's take a proxy measure of famous as has articles about them in Wikipedia in the largest number of languages, right? Presumably, the more famous a person is, the more likely it is they were covered in Arabic and Indonesian and Polish, etc., right? So take a few seconds and think about who is the most famous Romanian in your opinion, or who are the several most famous Romanians. And that's kind of a tricky question to answer, but of course, we can answer it very easily with our proxy measure of Wikipedia coverage. And according to Wikidata, which I remind you is queryable, and there's a URL here if you want to play with this query yourself. I will put up my slides. I will tweet them and share them, so you will have access to the slides. Don't worry about it. So here's an answer about who are the most famous Romanians according to Wikidata. And it turns out that even more famous than the infamous Ceausescu is Herta Müller. She writes in German, but she's from Romania. And there are 112 languages that cover her, that have a Wikipedia article about her, no doubt thanks to the Nobel Prize. Whereas only 104 languages have an article about Ceausescu, followed by Elie Wiesel, Eugene Ionesco, Nadia Comaneci, I'm old enough to remember her, and others. If you want to learn more about Wikidata, by the way, there is a link here to a 7-minute version of an introduction to Wikidata by me, and also to a 3-hour version introduction to Wikidata, also by me. So you can choose your poison. So here's another pop quiz. Where were Polish members of the Senate and Sejm educated? What universities did they go to? If you think about this question, if someone came to you, to your library, and said, I want to do some kind of study about where Polish elected officials tend to come from academically, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, you have to sort of collect this information from biographies or biographical writing about each of these people, and it's not so easy. But this is, again, something that Wikidata can tell you in seconds. And the answer is this. 140 of them were educated, at least 140 of them were educated in the University of Warsaw, 94 in the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, etc., etc. One of them was even educated in Nigeria, down the list. So why did I say at least 140 people? Because, of course, the data you get back from Wikidata is only as good as the data you put into Wikidata. I don't know just how complete our coverage of Polish Sejm members and Senate members on Wikidata is, and whether we have indeed recorded the institutes of higher education that they all went to. But this still gives us a picture, right? It can certainly tell us that, more people went to the University of Warsaw than to the University of Poznan. And I hope that each of these examples immediately extends in your mind isomorphically. So just as I asked about universities of Polish politicians, I could ask about what regions do these politicians come from, to see, whether the country is appropriately represented in elected parliaments. Or I could ask about the dates of birth of football players, or any combination of such pieces of data, since they are expressed structurally. This same query, by the way, I was able to also plot on a map with just one click more. And you can see here, this is the same query about Polish politicians' education. And you can see that, of course, a lot of them were educated in Poland, some of them elsewhere in Europe, a few in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and quite a few on the East Coast of the United States, not as many on the West Coast. And here's that one person from a Nigerian university. Again, just a super easy way to visualize some of the data there done for you. I didn't have to mess around with how to put it on a map, etc. There was a button there that let me do it. You can click those links later of my slides. One final pop quiz. Who are some Ukrainian politicians whose fathers were also politicians? Right? Like a question about political dynasties in a certain country. Again, if you are a Ukrainian citizen, you can probably name one or two. I don't know much about Ukraine, but I was able to get a whole list of such politicians thanks to Wikidata, right? So I can see here some on the left are the younger politicians, and on the right are the older politicians. So I can see, for example, that Poroshenko's son is a politician, and Paton's son, etc. Again, just a quick example of the power of Wikidata. All right, so this is fun, but what does it have to do with libraries? Well, all of this magic depends on structured data. And structured data, you know, is like metadata and like MARC, which I'm sure all of you know. It's data that has a very precise meaning. And because of its precision, it allows us a lot of power. So I remind you, this was just to demonstrate how we pursue the same goals for the same reasons to serve the same public in different methods. So let me take a leaf from the opening keynote by Dr. Hannelore Vogt. I think Wikimedia is a natural partner to libraries in this evolution that she mentioned, from merely serving consumers to encouraging makers, from turning observers into participants, whether it is in the political and social discourse of the country or in empowering them as makers in recycling, in education, in homeschooling, in whatever. Wikimedia is a natural partner to all of that work. So let me walk you through some examples and suggestions of what Wikimedia volunteers and libraries can do together. And I want to highlight these opportunities for collaboration along 5 paths. Partnering with your local Wikimedia community, or even starting one if you don't have a local Wikimedia community. Hosting Wikimedia events at your library. Teaching information literacy using Wikimedia. Contributing directly to the wikis. And providing an online reference desk for Wikimedians. So let's work through these. Chances are good that there is a lively Wikimedia community around you. Maybe you just don't know them. You don't have a relationship with them yet. I encourage you to invite them to the library for coffee and a chat, and just create that partnership. Even if it doesn't immediately turn into a project, or if there's not immediately funding to do anything, just create that relationship, because this general equation, and I've been watching Wikimedians and librarians work together for over 15 years, this general equation tends to work really well. You combine the library resources, the things the library already has and is already good at, with the Wikimedia volunteer energy, their initiative, their flexibility, and you get great projects. If you need help connecting with your local community, if as far as you know, there are no Wikimedians around you, email me. My email is also at the end of the presentation, and I'm very glad to help you connect. I know a lot of Wikimedians around the world, and I can make sure you are connected with the local community. Now, creating this long-term dialogue with those volunteers will enable all kinds of ideas and initiatives to be born. And once you are in touch with those Wikimedians and can really test out with them in your local context, in your local language, specific ideas, your own thinking, your own brainstorming about what is and isn't possible or appropriate for your institution will be a lot easier. Here's an example of that relationship. In 2012, already quite a while ago, the National Library of Israel hosted Wikipedia volunteers, Israeli Wikipedia volunteers who write on the Hebrew Wikipedia, and gave them a special collections tour, like a backstage tour of areas the general public doesn't get to see. This here is part of the Rare Maps collection, and one of the curators at the National Library was presenting these rare maps. This was exciting for Wikimedia volunteers. They took a bunch of pictures, they uploaded it, they illustrated a bunch of Wikipedia articles, but also it was a social meeting. It was a way to get to know these mysterious figures behind Wikipedia and these mysterious figures behind the National Library, which is, you know, kind of a remote and bureaucratic sounding body to most volunteers. What if there is no community around you? If there really is, after checking with me, if the conclusion is, yeah, in your city, in your part of the country, there really is no active volunteers that we know of, you can help start a local volunteer community. And we can help you with that. We can connect you with other volunteers who are farther away. We can offer you curriculum. We can participate in distance training, especially these days. And we can help you gather around you a free knowledge volunteer community centered on your library. It can be done. It has been done by a number of libraries. And so don't dismiss the ideas here by saying, oh yeah, but I already know there are no volunteers around me. This can be changed. So what can we do once we are in touch with the local Wikimedia volunteers around us? So libraries are perfectly positioned to host events related to our vision. These events can be trainings and workshops on information literacy and 21st century skills, media literacy. They can be free culture performances. They can be lectures and discussions on a variety of topics. And I'm going to zoom in a bit. Information literacy, I'm sure you've heard this before, is a crucial 21st century skill. We learn this again and again every year in the current millennium. And I'm sure this is already part of your discourse with your funders or municipalities or universities or institutions, that the information literacy is a need. It so happens that the Wikimedia ecosystem is an excellent real-world context for teaching information literacy, critical thinking, source assessment, the dynamics of debate and knowledge production, how facts are accepted as facts. What is truth? What is the scientific method? What is truth outside hard science? How is it arrived at? How does it ever get updated? By the way, in our region, just the other day, the English Wikipedia the community finally agreed to change the name of the article about Ukraine's capital from the Russian name Kiev to the Ukrainian name Kyiv. That was an argument that lasted years, literally years. The Wikimedia volunteers were arguing and discussing, yes, but the Britannica says this, and this source says this, and very few sources say Kyiv. Everybody says Kiev, and that's the name we know, and we'll have to change everything. And there was a whole discussion which involved ontology, right? Like, what is the name of this place? Well, it depends. Are you Ukrainian? Are you in Ukraine? Are you in a Russian? You know, there was a whole big discussion, which is itself very edifying, educational. If you can get people to see it, and the good news is you can get people to see it because that discussion happened entirely in writing, in public, on the talk page, the discussion page that's attached to the article about Kyiv. So that's just a quick example from literally last week of the processes of knowledge production that are literally on show in the Wikimedia ecosystem. But you don't have to get people involved contributing to Wikipedia. I find that libraries can and should offer lectures or workshops on how to use Wikipedia, how to make the most of Wikipedia as consumers, even before discussing how to contribute to Wikipedia, which is more complex. You can teach your patrons, your users, students, how to make the most of Wikipedia. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, they know how to use Wikipedia better than I do. But that's not necessarily the case. A lot of people use Wikipedia very superficially. And you can teach them how to read an article carefully, how to assess whether it's a reliable article or not, because the reliability does vary on Wikipedia. how to get people to look at that discussion page, which again is right there. There's a tab called Talk, but very few people ever click it. Very few people ever use categories that allow you lateral navigation on Wikipedia. Very few people ever look at the history of an article to check whether some vandalism took place. You can teach that at your library as a core skill that is useful to absolutely everyone living in the 21st century. You can also host Wikipedia editing workshops. And again, these kinds of workshops, of course, are easiest to host with collaboration from existing Wikimedia volunteers who are generally well-versed in how to teach this stuff. But when teaching Wikipedia editing, again, what makes sense from a library perspective is to focus on the principles, not the technique. So the technical way of how do you insert an image into an article, it's a technical thing. It's not very important. It's not very difficult either. And yes, young people today can easily figure it out. But teaching the principle of verifiability, the principle of notability, the principle of a neutral point of view. What is a neutral point of view? How am I neutral about political topics, about controversies? How am I neutral about sports? What is Wikipedia's opinion about who is the greatest football player of all time? The answer is Wikipedia doesn't have an opinion on that question, right? But what does Wikipedia say about, I don't know, the Arab-Israeli conflict or the India-Pakistan conflict? How do you even approach factual writing about such fraught issues? Well, Wikipedia does have an approach to controversy that I don't have enough time to present, but such a workshop can be extremely interesting to focus on, and librarians can be very valuable mediators of such values, of such principles, leaving aside the very technical details of how to edit. Here's an example of a wiki marathon, a wiki editing meeting that took place at a library, in this case, the Kyiv Mohila Academy Library in Ukraine. And these are Wikimedians gathering at the library to edit Wikipedia around a certain theme, which brings me to another kind of activity that you can do that relates to some things that were mentioned at the conference: workshops with an agenda. You can have editing get-togethers, either including the basic editing workshop or as follow-up for interested people who have done the basic editing workshop, where the get-together is focused on addressing a gap, a content gap or a participation gap, meaning how well does Wikipedia cover a certain topic, for example, women scientists, or people of color, or disabled athletes, or whatever, or national minorities, or focused on a participation gap, meaning we have very few women contributing to Wikipedia, far fewer than the 50% that we would ideally want. So you could have editing events that are particularly focused on attracting and involving women, or people of color, or national minorities, or LGBT people, or any group that is underrepresented among Wikipedia editors. You could have a workshop that has an agenda that's related to your library, your collections, your holdings, local history, local notable people. And especially if your language is one of the larger languages, English, Russian, whatever, you may feel, well, Wikipedia has covered everything. It's very hard to find something to contribute. But actually, if you think local, there's always a lot to contribute. Again, experienced Wikipedians can easily help you come up with lists of things that need to be written about, things that need to be expanded or improved. And when you go local, there's always local notable people, local history, local events, local plants and flowers that aren't well covered. And that your collection and your patrons, the people who come to your library, are well positioned to contribute on. And even if you don't have anything special like that, you can just focus not on writing and contributing articles, but on curating and organizing existing materials. For example, taking some of those millions of free media objects and integrating them, adding them to relevant articles. There's plenty of that still to be done, or categorizing articles, or better linking between articles. And these workshops can really address some of the persistent difficulties of Wikipedia with systemic bias. There's all kinds of systemic bias, unintentional bias. But whenever we rely, for example, on Victorian sources or early 20th century sources, we are relying on sources that were absolutely infected with colonialism. And even though they were authoritative and high quality, considered high quality at the time, we are at risk, at least, of ingesting some of that bias, some of that colonialism or imperialism with the information that we are based on. So even just by the fact that Wikipedians tend to work from home, they don't have access to materials at the level that librarians have access. And so they tend to use what they find, what's already online. And what's online is perhaps public domain, older material. You see, this creates a dynamic where Wikipedians tend to cite older things, perhaps not the most up-to-date, not the best sources available. This is where cooperating with a library can really help. Here's a photo from a Black Lives Matter editing event at the New York Public Library 5 years ago. And you can see that a bunch of people showed up, people who maybe weren't attracted to free knowledge in general, maybe weren't attracted to learning to edit at the library in general, but were attracted by the agenda. They wanted to do something as part of Black Lives Matter. This touches on the ability of librarians to contribute directly to the wikis. Of course, staff and library volunteers can make valuable direct contributions. Claudia mentioned the OneLibOneRef campaign, where we call upon every librarian to add at least one reference to Wikipedia. This is something, of course, librarians are eminently well-positioned to do. And last year, there were 13,000 edits in more than 50 languages with over 4 million words added. It's a massively impactful campaign. I also want to remind you that you can upload media from your library holdings. Of course, you need to mind copyright, but you should also avoid copyright paralysis. Just because it may not be easy to figure out whether it's public domain or not, who owns the rights or not, doesn't mean you shouldn't try. If it's too complicated, leave that particular media item alone and move on to the rest. But most libraries, even municipal libraries, smaller libraries, have some valuable media, archival material, old photos, local history that they could very meaningfully contribute to the commons, and which could then be used to illustrate articles and enrich existing material. Many libraries hold events unrelated to Wikimedia, right? Lectures, performances, readings, discussions, moderated discussions. And with permission, you could record those events. Maybe you already do. Maybe you publish them on Facebook or something. You could also upload those recordings to the Wikimedia Commons, where, again, they could be used to illustrate articles, to, whether they illustrate the article about one of the speakers or about the topic that was spoken about, or if it was a, performance of music by Chopin, then this can now be used to illustrate the articles about those particular musical works. The benefit of doing this is that you don't have to deal with any technical hosting or maintenance costs. It's pretty straightforward to upload to Wikimedia. You just need to be careful and mindful about the copyright status, and Wikimedia volunteers are experts and are ready to help you with that. Just a quick examples. The State Library of Queensland in Australia donated 50,000 historic photographs to the Commons. The British Library had a big mechanical curator project where they released 1 million images via Flickr, from which Wikimedia volunteers cataloged and identified more than 50,000 historic maps. These examples are from a document by IFLA. And one last quick example that I want to share with you is an online reference desk. I really like this idea. Wikimedians always need access to sources. I mentioned that they mostly work outside your library, and many of them won't or can't come into your library just to use your reference desk. But what if they could submit their requests online? What if you created a channel, whether email or Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever, and announced it to your local Wikimedia community that you are welcome to put questions here on this day or these hours or in this email? just ask, we will do our best to help. This can fit into your existing reference desk workflow. You're not doing anything different. It's just that you don't serve a patron who came up to you, you serve a digital request. But you have the added benefit of knowing that this answer that you just gave to a Wikipedian isn't going to just help this one person or this one term paper, but is going to make it eventually onto Wikipedia and help who knows how many future readers of that article. A good example of this, is, I'll take the hint, is the National Library of Israel, which put its virtual reference desk inside Hebrew Wikipedia itself, which is the best because that's where the Wikipedians are. Right there on the wiki, there is a page where they can put in their requests, and once a week, or I don't remember how often, the professional reference desk team at the National Library reviews it and offers answers, sometimes scans or photos, etc. Fantastic, easy, zero cost way to partner with the Wikimedia community. And more generally, I want you to think about adding a Wikimedia angle to your existing workflows. For example, do you run a book club? You can encourage your book club members to improve or read at least the Wikipedia coverage of the author, the book, the subject matter, the period. If you're hosting a lecture or a concert, you can in advance review the quality and coverage of the performers or composers who are going to perform. Maybe the article about this singer or public figure doesn't have a photo yet because nobody snapped a free photo of this person, but this person is about to come to your library. You or someone could take a photo and contribute it to Commons, and from now on, there will be a photo of this person on Wikipedia. Super easy, zero cost, already within your existing workflow. I'm deliberately focusing on things all librarians can do, not just national libraries.
Hi, Asaf. I just wanted to say that I'm also now on the screen. In the interest of time, we have to wrap it up and maybe get a couple of questions. I would invite the participants, if you have a few questions, besides the question, if you're going to share the slide, it came up a number of times. Yes. So we have the question, the answer for that. But if you have other questions, please put them, and Asaf will answer.
Yes. So please feel free to start putting questions on the chat, and Claudia will help me notice them. I'm just about done. I just wanted to share this quick last example. In the Czech Republic, libraries have hosted more than 40 courses, multi-meeting trainings for senior citizens as part of their teaching of computer literacy. Instead of just teaching them, here's how you browse the web, here's how you use Microsoft Word or whatever, they taught them how to do something with these digital skills that they gave them and taught them how to edit Wikipedia. More than 40 courses, the senior citizens love it, and you can read more about it in the link that I put on the slide. Here's a photo from the Czech Republic. And really, I'm encouraging you to think long-term. You can start small. It adds up to huge impact. So create this library relationship with your local Wikimedians today. Dream big, but start small, and we can grow together. I want to remind you that the benefits are there's no long-term commitment. There's no upkeep costs or maintenance nightmares. We own and maintain the technical infrastructure for all this. And lastly, I want to show you just a few screenshots. We have statistics, which is very good for proving impact to your funders or governors or whoever you need to prove your impact to. Here's a quick example from a couple of days ago. You may have heard of the United States Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away. And you can see this is a logarithmic scale graph, mind you. So most days there's about 5,000 to 10,000 views of the article on English Wikipedia about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then when on the day of her death, almost 4 million page views, right? A whole lot of people were like, Ruth Bader who? Of course, not just in the US where everybody knows her, but all over the world. This is an example of the impact of having that content on Wikipedia. And lest you think this is only true about English Wikipedia, here is the same on Polish Wikipedia. On Polish Wikipedia, most days, 20, 30, 40 people read about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When she died, 20,000 people. So This is available, by the way, to anyone. You don't have to work for the foundation to have these stats. These tools, these graphs are public and free. You can generate these graphs for any article on any Wikipedia for any time frame that you want. You can compare. This is an example from a stats tool that shows how often images that were contributed by the National Library in Warsaw were used. So as you can, they contributed 4,300 files. 1,000 of them were used on Polish Wikipedia. That's to be expected. But 14 of them were used on Vietnamese Wikipedia. And that's exciting. So again, these are freely available statistics tools that you can use. This is another example at the individual file level. You can see that this image donated by the University of Warsaw Library was viewed 5,000 times last month. Just this image, just last month. So again, it's really easy to feel the impact. So I hope I've convinced you to create a relationship with your local Wikimedians soon. I welcome your questions.
Hi, Asaf, again. Thank you for bringing the arguments to the table to why there is a natural connection between libraries and Wikimedia. Not many questions came up. We have a couple of questions from before. You're doing your presentation. I think it's a rather technical questions. And if you look in the chat, in the backstage chat, you can see, and if you decide to answer, then please go ahead. I think from our perspective, having Wikipedia still growing in this region, we cannot say, in our region that many of our languages are big, popular languages, and the development of Wikipedia is connected to community development, which is, again, is not a big thing in our region either. When we first met, I was very curious to if you can share a little bit about the efforts of building a Wikipedia community, Wikimedia community, because I know there have been efforts from individuals becoming editors and trying to grow, but that effort to really create community is not an easy effort. It's not a natural effort. It can be even though the international community is so big, at national level, at the local level, it can feel like a very lonely process. So if you can have any advices for people who are considering going on this route.
Yes, very briefly, I can say that people join and stay in the free knowledge movement for different reasons. Some people are really excited by the mechanics of it, by being able to just click edit in an encyclopedia and change what it says. And I fix a sentence, I add a sentence, I click save, and voila, the next person to look up this topic will read my sentence, right? That is motivating in itself for a lot of people. Other people are completely indifferent to that, but they deeply care about a particular topic. Right? We have a lot of editors who are only interested in their topic, whether it's aircraft or snails or ancient Greek, and that's what they care about. They're doing it because they want more information about ancient Greek or about butterflies to exist. There are people who are attracted to, let's call it, progressive or social activism via free knowledge. And here, it's very important to draw a very distinct line. Wikipedia has a neutral point of view policy. Wikipedia doesn't advocate for or against anything, not even against genocide, right? We can all agree genocide is a terrible thing, but if you read the article about genocide on Wikipedia, you will get a description of what it means and who coined the term. You won't read genocide is really terrible, right? That's not a position that the encyclopedia has. So people who do have a social agenda, whether it's Black Lives Matter or feminism or LGBT rights or whatever, can promote it in a neutral way by simply improving the coverage, the neutral coverage of knowledge, of topics, and educating rather than advocating for that. right? That's the key. But again, you could attract a whole group of people who aren't excited by the abstract idea of a free knowledge encyclopedia on a wiki, but are excited about certain kinds of activism, certain causes. So if you are trying to create such a nucleus of volunteers around you, I recommend that you try these different approaches and see what sticks, right? What do the people around you, what do the people who come to your events get excited about?
Yeah, thank you. We're going to take the two questions that are on the chat now, and I think we're going to wrap up in the interest of time. So
I'm also happy to answer questions on Twitter later.
So we have, that's a rumor going around that Wikidata may eventually replace Wikipedia. Is that true or not? Can you confirm or deny?
No, absolutely not. Wikidata is a structured database, right? It's a bunch of triples. It says things like Bucharest is the capital of Romania. It will never tell you
an article,
a narrative history of Dacia, right? It can never answer questions of how did the Ottoman Empire rise or fall? These are narrative questions that will never, ever be covered by Wikidata. Wikidata is a structured database. It is not coming for Wikipedia. It is not replacing Wikipedia. There is talk about what might we be able to generate, natural language generation, based on Wikidata to provide some knowledge, not really narrative knowledge, but some knowledge in minority languages, in small languages where there just isn't the volunteer base to create a lot of knowledge. Can we provide, placeholders or sort of minimal knowledge nuggets
if
in the local language in a machine-generated way? That is happening, but it's not replacing the human effort.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about, the librarians' fear of being replaced by computers, which is happening in libraries who are just starting to use computers. So it's probably something related with a deep down fear that we might have. And one other final question is from the library field. We are working on United Nations SDGs. And if you have any suggestion to work together, librarians and Wikipedians, Wikimedians, on this maybe common goal?
Yes, so obviously education is the SDG that is closest to our hearts. But it's such a broad field that there are thousands of conceivable projects just around that, just around sustainable education, just around ensuring every child on the planet has access to modern, up-to-date, high-quality multimedia learning materials, for example, and wiki platforms and wiki curation. Collaborating with professionals, both librarian professionals and educational professionals, can really be a bridge to that. So broadly, I would say the avenue along which we collaborate is primarily education and also free culture. Not so much, access to sanitation or, some of the other SDGs. We don't really have much to say or offer around that. But even within this field of access to education, it is a profoundly political question. It is a profoundly political challenge, but it's also a huge field of opportunity for innovation, for collaboration. And there are quite a few Wikipedians who are interested in the UN's projects and vocabulary, are ready to talk SDG language, are ready to collaborate in projects that receive funding based on the SDGs. There are partners in our
and
side.
Also there's a Wikidata working group within IFLA that has been sharing a few links on the chat. Thank you, Asaf, very much for your contribution to our Occupy library. I think we cannot occupy a library without having, the knowledge and the expertise of the Wikimedia community. And the idea is for us to get together and educate better our users and ourselves. Thank you very much for this talk. And I invite the participants, if you want to hang around for another few minutes to talk about how are we thinking about the future of this conference and not only. We'll be right back. Thank you very much.